Raised in the shadows of cruelty and neglect, one girl claws her way from servitude to power, proving that resilience is the fiercest form of revenge. Before we dive in, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Susan's heart had long since ceased to race with hope. Instead, it thudded, a slow, methodical beat, as if it too had been drained of all ambition. The first rays of sunlight trickled through the cracks of the old, rotting window, casting long shadows across the dusty wooden floor. The house, once filled with the laughter of a loving family, now stood as a hollow shell, a relic of a time before Susan's world had shattered. Her mother had died when Susan was still a baby. Susan had never known her. All she had were the faint whispers of her father's sorrow and the memories of a woman who had never been there to hold her hand. When Susan's father remarried, he did so with the hope that someone could fill the void that her mother left behind. But that hope was quickly dashed. Evelyn, his second wife, had no interest in raising another woman's child. Instead, she brought with her an entire world of cruelty that would suffocate Susan's spirit for years to come. The first time Evelyn came to the house, Susan was a child, just old enough to understand what was happening, but too young to grasp the full horror of it. She watched as her father, a man who once adored her with a love that knew no bounds, handed over his heart to Evelyn. And from that moment on, it was as if Susan ceased to exist in her father's eyes. Evelyn wasn't a woman who needed to make herself known. She exuded power with a soft, almost soothing voice, one that lulled Susan's father into a deep sense of complacency. Evelyn's three daughters, each more beautiful and more polished than Susan could ever dream of being, stepped into the house with the air of royalty. Rachel, the eldest, was the most stunning of them all, a vision of grace and elegance. Where Susan saw her stepsister's beauty, she could only compare herself to the bruised, battered soul within her. Rachel's laughter rang through the house like a sharp, biting wind, filling the air with something bitter, something cruel. While Susan was pushed into the corners, left to clean and cook, Rachel and her sisters played, their lives unfurling like a rich tapestry. And yet, in that same house, Susan was left to wither, silent and invisible. Susan was just a ghost in the house, moving in the shadows, doing the chores that no one else would. Every morning before the sun had risen, she was up, cleaning, cooking, preparing breakfast. Her stepmother had little patience for delays. "A woman's place is in the kitchen," she would say, her voice chilling as she barked orders. The house was never spotless enough. There were always more chores to do, more floors to scrub, more meals to prepare. There was never enough time to sit, to think, or to rest. Her stepmother's cold eyes, watching from every corner, made Susan feel as though she were always under scrutiny, always being judged. It didn't matter how hard she worked, Evelyn would find something to criticize. The way Susan laid out the dishes, the way she folded the laundry, the way she swept the floor. Nothing was ever good enough. Rachel, on the other hand, had no such worries. She sat at the table, reading, laughing with her friends while Susan worked herself to the bone. Rachel's world was filled with beauty and ease. Her life was one long parade of compliments and admiration. But as Susan watched from the periphery, she realized that it wasn't just Rachel who made her life miserable. It was her father, too. Her father had been swallowed whole by Evelyn's charm. He rarely spoke to Susan anymore, his eyes blank when he glanced her way. The man who had once held her close, kissed her forehead, and told her everything would be okay, was now a distant memory, replaced by a shadow of himself. He never saw the bruises that Evelyn left on Susan's heart. He never noticed the harsh words, the cruelty that Rachel and her sisters inflicted on her every day. As the years passed, the weight of Susan's existence grew heavier. She learned to wake before the sun, to be the first to rise and the last to sleep. The days blurred together, One endless cycle of serving her stepmother's whims, cleaning up after Rachel's indulgences, and watching from the sidelines as life passed her by. It was as though she were living in a cage, a bird trapped inside a gilded cage, its wings clipped by the unrelenting cruelty of those around her. Rachel, the ever-perfect daughter, would taunt her, always with a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "You think you'll ever be like me, Susan?" she'd say, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're just a servant. No one will ever love you. You're destined to stay in this miserable house forever." Susan tried to push the words away, but they burned deep into her soul. There was no way out. No one would ever look at her the way they looked at Rachel. There was no way to escape the suffocating grip of Evelyn's control. Susan would never be more than a servant in her own home. And yet, every time she closed her eyes at night, there was a flicker of hope, a glimmer of possibility. She dreamed of a life where she wasn't invisible, where she could stand tall, unafraid to speak her mind, unafraid to show the world who she really was. But those dreams were always out of reach, like stars that twinkled in the sky but never came close enough to touch. Everything changed the day Jonathan Williams arrived at the doorstep. At first, Susan thought it was a mistake. There was no way a man like him, a man so handsome, so confident, would be here for her. She had never been noticed before, never been anything other than a shadow in the background. But there he was, stepping out of a sleek black car, his expensive suit glistening in the sunlight. He looked like someone out of a dream, someone who didn't belong in her world. Her stepmother wasted no time in ushering him inside. "You must forgive our humble home," she said, all sweetness and grace. "We are not accustomed to such distinguished guests." Susan stood in the doorway, unnoticed. She couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. Was this the moment? Was this the escape she had longed for? But as Jonathan stepped inside, his eyes met hers for the briefest of moments, and something stirred inside her. It was the first time someone had looked at her, not with pity, not with disdain, but with something warmer, something more human. Jonathan smiled, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I'm here to speak with Miss Susan," he said, his voice deep and smooth. The words struck her like a bolt of lightning, shattering the fog of despair that had settled over her life. Her stepmother, of course, wasted no time. "Oh, you must forgive Susan," she said, gesturing to Susan with exaggerated politeness. "She's been busy with her chores. I'll fetch her right away." Susan's heart raced as she stepped forward. Could this be her chance? Was she finally going to be seen? Could this man see her the way she had always dreamed to be seen? But as the hours wore on, as Jonathan spoke to her stepmother and Rachel, something began to feel off. His glances, while kind, were always fleeting. His attention, always drifting toward Rachel. Evelyn had already begun her game, guiding Jonathan's every word, every gesture, leading him toward Rachel, ever the perfect daughter. The tension in the house grew palpable. Jonathan visited several more times, always greeting Susan with that warm smile, but always turning his attention back to Rachel. Evelyn had already begun to weave her web. Rachel, with her dazzling beauty and effortless charm, was everything Jonathan could ever want, everything Susan wasn't. One evening after Jonathan left, Susan overheard her stepmother speaking with Rachel. "He's perfect for you, Rachel," Evelyn whispered, her voice full of calculated sweetness. "He's rich, powerful. All we need is for you to keep his attention. The rest will fall into place." Rachel, never one to be outdone, beamed with pride. "Don't worry, Mother. I know exactly what to do." Susan's heart shattered. This was the moment she had hoped for, and yet it was slipping through her fingers. Jonathan wasn't here for her. He had been here for Rachel from the beginning. Susan was just a pawn in a game she hadn't even known was being played. And as the days passed, it became painfully clear. Jonathan was going to marry Rachel. The life Susan had dreamed of, the escape she had longed for, was never going to happen. Days following Jonathan's last visit blurred together. Susan moved through them like a ghost, her hands still working tirelessly, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in the fragments of hope that had been cruelly dashed. Her father, too blind in his new life with Evelyn, never noticed the transformation in Susan. The joy in her eyes had faded, replaced by a kind of numbness she couldn't shake off. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was something worse. She was seen, but only as the one who existed to serve, to fade into the background. The sting of Jonathan's attention drifting away from her and toward Rachel was something Susan carried in her chest, like a wound that refused to heal. Her dreams of escape, of a life outside the prison of her stepmother's home, felt like a distant memory, one she couldn't even reach. But one night, as she was scrubbing the kitchen floor with more force than necessary, she overheard something that would set her heart racing once again. The words were quiet, whispered between her stepmother and Rachel, but Susan heard them all the same. She froze mid-motion, her heart in her throat as she heard her stepmother say, "Jonathan will marry you, Rachel. You'll have everything you ever wanted." It was as if the floor had dropped out from under her. The cold tile beneath her hands felt sharper now, more unforgiving. Evelyn's words were filled with the sweet taste of victory, but it wasn't Susan who had won. She had been played, a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was in. Her breath caught in her throat as Rachel's voice answered with the venom of someone who had already won. "Of course I will marry him. He's perfect for me. And once I'm married to him, everything will be different. No more worrying about anything. I'll never have to work again. I'll live in luxury." Rachel's laughter, sharp, cruel, and satisfied, echoed in Susan's ears. It was a sound she had heard countless times, but now it struck her differently. Rachel was not only the victor, she was savoring her win. She was rubbing it in Susan's face, and Susan had no power to stop it. She felt the anger rise in her chest, bitter and choking. She had spent years under the rule of this cruel woman, watching her thrive while Susan languished in the shadows. And now, Jonathan, the man she had briefly dared to hope for, had been swept away by Rachel's beauty, by the mask of perfection that Rachel wore so easily. Rachel's transformation was swift. She seemed to glide through the house now, her smile more radiant than ever, her steps lighter. The victory she had secured in winning Jonathan's heart made her even more insufferable. Susan's presence no longer seemed to matter to her at all. In fact, Rachel seemed to take pleasure in Susan's misery, knowing that she had everything Susan wanted. One evening, as Susan was washing the dishes, Rachel walked into the kitchen. The glint in her eyes made Susan's stomach churn. "You must be feeling so proud of yourself, Susan," Rachel said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You managed to be in Jonathan's presence for a few minutes, didn't you? Too bad it didn't work out. I suppose you just weren't good enough, were you?" Rachel's words were like daggers. They cut through Susan's already fragile sense of self-worth. The resentment in Rachel's voice was palpable. Resentment for the life Susan had lived and for the fact that Susan had dared to dream. "You should be used to this by now," Rachel continued, stepping closer. "You've always been the servant, haven't you? Never good enough to be more than that." Susan stood motionless, her hands clenched tight around the dishcloth, her breath shallow. There was nothing she could say. No words would make it stop. Rachel smirked as she turned away, her back to Susan. "Don't worry, Susan. I'll take care of you. After all, someone needs to clean the house." Just when Susan thought she had reached the end of her rope, when the weight of Rachel's cruelty became unbearable, Carl appeared. He was nothing like Jonathan, nothing like the wealthy, charming man who had briefly captured her attention. Carl was just a simple furniture maker. Rough hands, humble clothes, and a quiet, kind smile that somehow made everything feel less heavy. He was not here to impress her with riches or promises. He was just real. A man who had no need for illusions. Their first conversation was simple. Nothing extraordinary, just a casual chat when Carl came to deliver a piece of furniture her father had commissioned. But there was something in his eyes. Something that made Susan feel seen for the first time in years. For the first time, someone looked at her and didn't see a servant. They didn't see someone who was invisible. Carl saw her, and he didn't just see her as a woman who did the chores, the work. He saw her for who she really was, an intelligent, capable, strong woman who had been held back by life's circumstances. "You don't deserve this, Susan," Carl said softly as they sat together on the porch one evening. "You deserve to be happy, to have more than this." His words were like a balm to her aching soul. For the first time, someone was giving her permission to dream again. And so, when Carl asked her out on a simple walk, Susan found herself saying yes, hesitantly at first, but then with more conviction. She wasn't sure where this would go, but she knew one thing. Carl made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could escape the life that had been forced on her. As Carl and Susan's bond grew stronger, Rachel's world began to unravel. The rich life she thought she had married into, the life of luxury, was built on lies. Jonathan, the man she had married, was not who he claimed to be. The Rolls-Royce? Borrowed. The house they had lived in? Rented. The businesses he claimed to own? Non-existent. The cracks in Rachel's perfect life started appearing in the most subtle of ways. Jonathan began to come home late, his excuses thin and far-fetched. He started acting differently, nervous, irritable. Rachel noticed the tension in his voice when he spoke of money and how he would always avoid talking about the future. One night, Jonathan came home looking a shadow of the man he had once been. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He dropped onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Jonathan admitted, his voice cracking. "The debts are piling up. I never owned any of it. Not the house, not the car. None of it was mine." Rachel's world came crashing down. The man she had married was a fraud. Everything had been a lie, a grand illusion designed to win her over. And now that the truth was out, there was no escape from the wreckage. While Rachel's world collapsed, Susan's life took a turn for the better. Carl, the humble man who had come into her life, began to change everything. His small furniture shop grew, thanks to the contracts Susan helped him secure. And one day, Carl received an unexpected call, a government contract that would change their lives forever. The contract was large, lucrative, and suddenly, Susan and Carl were on the verge of something they had never imagined: financial freedom, respect, and the chance to build something of their own. Carl's business boomed, and Susan finally felt like she was in control of her own fate. But as her life changed, Rachel's continued to spiral. Jonathan's lies caught up with him. The debt was unmanageable, and Rachel was forced to confront the harsh reality of the life she had built on illusion. They were forced to move into a small, cramped apartment, their former world of luxury now a distant, painful memory. Rachel, pregnant and stuck, visited Susan one day, her pride long gone, replaced by desperation. You've won," Rachel said, her voice barely a whisper. "I married for wealth, for status, and look where I am now. You have everything I wanted. You have Carl. You have happiness." Susan, standing tall in her newfound strength, looked at Rachel, not with pity, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence. "I didn't win because I wanted what you had," Susan said, her voice steady. "I won because I believed in something real. I believed in love, in hard work, in building something from nothing. And that's what made all the difference." Susan's victory wasn't just about the wealth she and Carl had built. It wasn't about showing Rachel that she had been wrong. It was about reclaiming her own life. A life that was once dictated by the cruelty of others, but now shaped by her own choices, her own strength, and her own love. Rachel, now left with nothing, would have to live with the consequences of her choices. But Susan had something far more valuable: freedom, respect, and the knowledge that her victory was not just financial, it was a triumph of the spirit. Subscribe and follow for more thrilling stories.